Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dan Esty. I'm a professor at Yale University. I teach corporate sustainability, among other things. And it's really a great pleasure to welcome you to this fourth day of the Building Bridges program. And you are the hardy leaders of the effort, staying with us through to our final day. And we have covered an enormous amount over the course of the week. But we dig in now to a topic that's been part of the conversation, but we put it into sharp focus, and that's the move towards a circular economy. In fact, we want to think about today how we unlock the power of the circular economy, and I do think this reflects one of the big picture trends that we all are watching as we try to understand what sustainability means. I call it a mega trend of the 21st century. I do think we're headed for a world where zero waste may be a target. We may not get there, but a dramatically reduced amount of waste is for sure part of the story. And we do know that the waste issue is the oldest part of the environment agenda, not just for decades, not just for centuries, but thousands of years. I have colleagues at Yale who study the waste of societies gone by, looking at the middens, the places that trash was dumped thousands of years ago, to understand what those societies were about. So how a society manages waste tells us a lot about that society. And I do think we're seeing fundamental change away from a take, make, deposit model to a circular model. We are seeing a lot of pushback on waste, and I do think we're seeing emerging business models that help us get there. I personally have been arguing that the business world of the future is likely to have a pushback on any business model that depends for its success on spilling harm on others, including leaving waste behind for others to manage. From the economics point of view, that would be a no uninternalized externalities model. Probably doesn't mean we end pollution or waste, but it might well mean everyone is paying for those harms they push onto others. So we do want to get into the details here today. We want to think about resource productivity. We want to think about recycling and reuse, repurposing. We want to think about how to manage the end-of-product life on extended producer responsibility models. We want to think about the technology innovations that may help us get from where we are today to where we know we want to be, with a much more sustainable structure for our economy, a much more circular economy. With that, we have a special chair of the session who I'd like to introduce. Felix Philippe is the special chair of our session, and for that honor, he comes to us from the Lombard-Odier Group as the head of the Circular Economy Research Group. So Felix, please, give us a sense of the issues from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Dan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be kicking us off for the third and final day of the Building Bridges Action Days. The last couple of days already set a very high bar, but I'm convinced that today has a lot more in store for you. Today, I would like to share 3 simple messages with you. Messages that you will keep in mind when you listen to the amazing panel that is to follow throughout the remainder of the conference and whenever you grapple with sustainability challenges in your daily life. The first message I want to share is that circularity is the single most important thing that you can work on. I have to admit, given my role, I might be biased, but I'm certainly convinced. Why is that? Well, materials, they form the bedrock of our economy. Everything around you, everything that you see here, everything that you use, that your house has been produced from materials that were once grown or extracted, processed and produced, and they are used and they will become waste. However, the way we manage these materials, the way we extract and produce, is a key driver of our triple planetary crisis. According to the International Resource Panel, our material extraction and processing is responsible for over 90% of land-based biodiversity loss, 60% of climate impacts, and 30% of pollution. By the way, destroying over $1 trillion of economic value every year. Hence, to address our nature and climate challenges, everything that we've been discussing here over the last 2 days, we have to get the materials question right to address these challenges. Everything else will be in vain if we don't get our materials and resource question right. Hence, we need to transition away from a linear, extractive, and polluting economy towards a circular, regenerative, and value-generating economy. The second message that I want to mention today is that circularity goes way beyond these environmental imperatives, but is key to our own economic prosperity, resilience, and autonomy. Over the last 50 years, resource consumption has doubled, and it's set to double again over the next 25 years. So we're accelerating the use of materials. However, at the same time, our material productivity, how much value we generate for each unit of input, has stagnated. We've not been getting better at using the scarce materials that we have. Now, this may not have been a problem in the past, when resources were plentiful, but we're very quickly reaching the end of the abundance. As stocks decline, as our ecosystem productivity is reducing, countries are moving to secure their own access and supply, leading to increasingly tight markets, high dependency, and high volatility. Circularity allows us to decouple economic value creation from resource use, improve resilience by creating localized supply chains, enhance autonomy by reducing dependency on finite resources, and boost productivity through efficient resource use. Last but not least, the transition to circularity will undoubtedly be challenging. We have to be honest about this. However, it also represents a tremendous opportunity for those who take the lead, for corporates, governments, and investors alike. For companies, it's a hard undertaking. It's really challenging. We have to completely rethink how we design, how we produce, and how we use products. This requires often new technologies, new processes, new roles, yes, also new incentives. However, it also opens the door to developing new circular business models build competitive advantage and address rapidly shifting value pools. For governments, embracing circularity can lead to enhanced job creation, economic stability, and a stronger commitment to sustainability. And for investors, this transition unveils a whole wealth of new investment opportunities unfolding right before our eyes, from new low-impact and high-performance materials to advanced supply chain management and solutions and transparency, matching supply and demand, and addressing overconsumption, to sharing models and as-a-service models that improve product utilization and reduce the need for more resources. In conclusion, circularity is not only a pathway to environmental sustainability, but also to economic resilience and innovation. Only together we can lead the charge towards a future that values regeneration over depletion, collaboration over competition, and sustainable growth over short-term gains. Thank you very much.
Felix, thank you. Felix, thank you very much. You've given us a great starting point for our conversation today, covering broadly the issues in play. And I now want to turn to our session panel, three very interesting perspectives on the challenge. And first up is Julia Binder. She is a professor at IMD, professor of sustainable innovation and business transformation. It's really my favorite title I've ever heard in the world of corporate sustainability. It covers all the most interesting issues. And Julia comes to us with a book called The Circular Business Revolution, so really very much poised to address this challenge of circularity. But I also want to mention, honoring the fact that she has got not just one book that came out in June, but a second that came out, I think, yesterday on leading sustainable business transformation. So this is a high productivity scholar of the first order. And Julia, what have you found in your research? What is the business revolution that we need?
Thank you, Dan. I think Felix set us up very, very well. What we require, if we look at all of the challenges that we have out there, resource shortages, geopolitical tensions, right? It's not just a resource question, it's also how volatile are our supply chains, how secure is our supply, then basically what we require is nothing less than a revolution. However, what we find is actually what gets us there is an evolution. These business models will not change overnight. However, and I think this is what you were also asking, what do we find is actually that we're still very much in a feel-good circular economy, meaning that most business leaders see and really like the idea of circularity. They find it intuitively appealing, but A, they struggle to really put it into practice. It is difficult, it is very complex and challenging. But B, what is more is we're still innovating to keep our license to operate. Right? So it's still, how can we extend our current business case as much as possible? How can we improve it to indeed address issues of resource shortages, issues of new regulation coming in, but we're not there yet to fundamentally rethink what we're actually doing. And I think there are several challenges, obviously. I mean, one of the biggest one is that even if you're a very well-intended company, if you really want to change something, the problem is still how do we get there in a very rigid economy? And I think this is where finance plays a key role. How do we finance this transformation from our current, and I think we've heard enough the last days, unsustainable status quo to a regenerative and circular future? And again, it requires nothing less than a revolution, but we need to somehow get there, and it will not happen overnight. But the decisions we make today will actually pave the way for what will follow in the years to come.
Thank you. You've given us more to talk about. I want to come back to these questions of resource productivity and how we manage in a world where at least some number of businesses and some number of societies don't pay for their waste. And that does reduce the incentive for change. So let's move on to how this is perceived from a corporate point of view. Aya, you come to us from Tetra Pak, and you've also had a career in the forest products world, as well as some time at UNICEF, so you bring a very broad view. And Tetra Pak, of course, has a particularly interesting industry space, and that is, of course, in the food products area. And this is a place where some of the challenges of circularity really come into sharp focus. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how you and the Tetra Pak team are thinking about the circular economy. It's a core element of what Tetra Pak says to the world it wants to do, and yet you must be coming up against some of the challenges Julia's talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. And for those of you who don't know maybe Tetra Pak so well, we're kind of, normally we're almost like a synonym for the carton packages that you have for milk. And that's obviously part of, well, that's our heritage, and that's really the core of our business. But you may not know that we're also one of the world's largest food processing and manufacturing technology companies. So if you're having a mozzarella salad today for lunch, there's a good chance that it was done with our machinery, or a Magnum ice cream. That's also one of our biggies in terms of technology. So food is really in the center of everything we do. So all our solutions, they touch food, and food safety, food security, all those topics are super important for us, as is resilience in the food system. And if we look at circularity in food, I mean, for you in finance, you should see that as a huge opportunity, because as you know, probably there's 1/3 of the food in the world which is produced is lost. It's lost somewhere, and there's a price tag on all that. So diverting some of that food back to those who need it, ensuring that there is a circularity already in the design of food products and all that, it's a really, really big topic. And some people might say that it's a no-brainer. So why are we unable to fix it? So EU is currently the first region or the first area where this is going to be regulated. And even so, I'd specifically like to point out the opportunities in the food processing part of the chain, because there is about 15% of the losses of the waste is actually generated in that part of the food and beverage value chain. So in terms of the technology transfers, in terms of innovation, there are huge opportunities. There are opportunities in designing food differently, so really looking at the recipes, but also designing the technologies and the systems, how you produce differently. Of course, there are also novel technologies which mean that you can innovate on ingredients, and these are all the type of things we do. In addition, what we really are invested in is also, there's a huge installed base, and what you might know about the food and beverage sector as such, it is a very old school technology. It's a lot of SMEs. There's some of the installations and the processes, they've been set out 20, 30 years ago. So if we were to look at the waste actually generated in certain products, so for instance, you put a tomato in, what do you get out? So how much of the tomato is waste? You can actually also valorize waste. And this is what we see also as a huge opportunity to actually introduce, leverage, incentivize technologies for valorizing side streams and reusing waste to become food and feed for the populations that require that. So we see it as an opportunity, and I think the financial sector may have not fully leveraged the opportunities that exist in this area.
Yeah, thank you. Again, there's a lot to come back to, but let's get Rob into the conversation. Rob Cameron from Nestle, Vice President and Global Head of ESG Engagement. So you bring us years of experience in this space, trying to understand the circular economy and all of its dimensions. Nestle, of course, a company with global reach and also reach across the elements of this circularity challenge. Upstream issues, downstream issues, manufacturing, all of it. So Rob, tell us how you look at this and how is Nestle addressing these challenges?
Sure, thanks Dan, thanks. Good morning everybody. Yes, firstly, before getting into the Nestle piece, I just think some general thoughts on circularity. I think that it's important to pick up on that word Julia used, evolution. There isn't quite yet a revolution, it has to be said. And in fact, I was reading, I'm involved as well as Nestle with the International Chamber of Commerce, and under the auspices of the Environment Commission, a recent report from the ICC says that if you look at the global economy, in fact, about 7.2% of it could be considered circular. Good news, maybe, not much. It's actually down. It's down from 9.1% 5-6 years ago. So if anything, this is in reverse at the moment. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we may get into some of the complexities of those. But I think it's important to understand that this is theoretically, and we heard from Felix, spot on exactly what we should be thinking about. And we need to look for every opportunity to push it forward, but it's not easy. Now, you mentioned the 3 domains, and I'll pick those up from Nestle's point of view in turn. There's the upstream side, the manufacturing side, and then there's the delivery side. On the upstream side, this is where we see most opportunity. Nestlé as a company depends wholly upon agriculture. Agriculture, obviously, natural processes. And in fact, when it comes to circularity, there is nothing more circular than the natural world. Think about it. There is no waste in nature. Now, I would argue that our economic system is a subsystem of the overall ecosystem. And one of the reasons why we're faced with the challenges we face is that our economic system is out of whack with the ecosystem, because we do have waste. We have considerable amounts of it. Now, in agriculture, we see the greatest opportunities to turn that waste into something practical and useful. We're engaged in a big transition on regenerative agricultural practices, and so everything on the farm has a value of some sort or other. The question is figuring out how to use it. Actually, lately, we've taken this a stage further. Manure as a business. So the idea of farmers using manure as actually something that could not only be used on their farm, but it could actually be converted into something that has economic value on other people's farms. On the manufacturing side, we've been, I think, pretty good there. I mean, 10 years ago, we did our first dairy manufacturing facility. Takes milk, turns it into milk powders, and actually used to use quite a lot of water. But of course, the greater part of milk is water, so why not figure out how you can condense all of that water and use it and make it part of a circular system. In fact, most of our facilities around the world are on now zero waste to landfill. Pretty much all of them are down to zero water or thereabouts when it comes to milk production and so on. We heard from Edja about the idea of taking waste materials and using them as side streams. Terrific idea, and we've been doing it again and again and again. And you know what? I have to tell you, it's really, really difficult. And the reason why I think it's difficult, we've got examples of sorghum that gets converted into cereals. We've got cocoa husks that are used as sweeteners. We've got coffee byproducts that have been used as drinks. And they haven't stuck in the market. They've been piloted and they haven't stuck. One of the reasons why is because it's push. We're taking something and trying to figure out how we could push it onto the market, but the pull from consumers isn't there. And that's a challenge we've got to keep thinking about. Finally, on the delivery side, I think this is where we see obviously most attention focused on a company like Nestlé because of the packaging side of things. It's not all about plastics, but it very much is about plastics. And we've been working on a five-pronged delivery model to try and figure out how we get across this. So reducing the use of plastics, eliminating it where possible in terms of reuse and refill, paperization in terms of redesigning our packaging, recycling, systems for recycling is a really important part of this. It's one thing to be designed for recycling. If the systems aren't there to recycle, you've got a problem. But the final one, the final R in the 5 is rethink. Rethink behaviors, and that's a rethink that has to be done internally, but actually we're hitting barriers with consumer behavior as well. I'm not pinning it on consumers, far from it, but things like reuse and refill, it's not easy in food and beverages to get reuse and refill up and running at scale.
Rob, thank you very much. Again, lots to discuss here. Let me go back to Julia and dig into the challenge Rob's presented, which is there's a wide variety of elements here or materials that we're trying to think about and imagine some kind of circular model for. What's your research tell us about how we manage this enormous diversity of materials that are at play?
I think we need to acknowledge that what Rob said is absolutely spot on. We need to move away from thinking that circularity equals recycling. I think that is a very fundamental first step, because I have been introduced on stage as the recycling lady. So I think this is something that is still very much a shortcut, that when we hear circularity, we think recycling. And now to Rob's point, 7.2% of the global economy actually is circular, meaning recycling. When we talk about recycling, what we really talk about in most instances is downcycling, meaning we lose value with each and every so-called recycling step. So I think the beauty about the circular economy is that there are actually a lot of business model opportunities out there. And I think this is what we need to disentangle. You mentioned valorize waste. I would add, let's say, monetizing extended product lives, right? So we know that extending product lives would be one of the ways to cater to a circular economy, but how do we make money with it, right? So if my products last forever, nice, but what's the business case, right? So I think very fundamentally for all of these circular business models, what is at stake is that we identify the business case. We cannot disentangle impact case from business case. For the longest time, we have positioned the circular economy in the realm of sustainability, and I think it's wrong.
Fascinating.
Circularity should be a means towards an end, meaning that circularity will help us to achieve our, for instance, climate targets as well, which many don't even think, right? We think energy when we hear climate. 50% is resources when we talk about climate. So it is a means towards an end for that. But it's fundamentally, those that are successful in the circular economy see it as a means towards profitability and growth. And I think we need to move away from positioning circularity as something we do for doing good, towards something that we do very strategically to future-proof our business and to tap into very exciting new market spaces, of which several you've mentioned.
Thank you for that, because it does give us a sense of the challenge in front of us, which is to make this work on the ground across business options and places. And I want to come back to you on this, because one of the elements that comes out of this conversation is that there are trade-offs. And Tetra Pak, of course, achieved great success by delivering food safety and long-lasting food supply. And I'm wondering how, as a company, you think about that as the origins of the business, and really, that's the business case for the carton. And how do you move from that model to a circular model without losing those enormously valuable things that the public cares a lot about?
Yeah, I think there are challenges, as you well put it. I think theory and practice very rarely meet in the discussion when you talk about new business models in circular packaging, for instance, is a good example. And I think Rob, you touched upon that as well. So I think there's been interesting cases. So I work a lot with regulation, and I really welcome regulation also, because it should be driving and incentivizing circularity. And so if we look into packaging, for instance, there's been a lot of push at the end of life of packaging. But like you well said, I mean, it all starts in the beginning of the life cycle. And when we talk about food packaging also, it's not just any packaging, and there's been regulations where sort of excessive packaging is mandated or banned. There's forced transitions to reuse, not considering that there are perishable foods that need to be packed. I think we all recognize that there's a lot of packaging out there, including ours, which is not perfect in terms of design principles, but the design is driven by what we try to protect. And when it's highly perishable foods and you use technologies where you try to preserve food without additives, there are some design requirements, which of course we invested very, very much into this. But I think, we, at least in our company, we've seen that, we have these design principles in for packaging or equipment and everywhere, and then we have, of course, life cycle thinking of what does it mean in terms of business models and end of life of even equipment. And I'd still like to be a bit of like devil's advocate in saying that none of this is moving forward unless there's regulation somehow pushing and incentivizing that.
All right, Rob, I want you to pick up where Aya left us off.
Yep.
What are the policy interventions you'd like to see to make more of this work? And Julia, I'm going to make you answer this question too, because you've obviously all been thinking about this. And I do think the world as it is not getting to a circular future, and we need a framework that allows us incentives to get there.
It's true, and regulation often is a problem. So, for example, at a very tactical national level, I think of an example in Egypt where the regulation said you can't use this, you can't recycle food-grade plastics. So, it puts us in a very difficult position because everything we need has to be food grade. So we work with the government, we work out a way in which the regulations can be changed, and then we have a system now where we can, and actually working with waste pickers. I want to come back to waste pickers as well at a certain point. The big regulation question, though, right now, and many of you will have heard about this, is the UN Treaty on Plastics to end plastic waste. This is a treaty that was actually being negotiated last week in South Korea. And sadly, I regret to report that the talks have failed. They've stalled anyway, let's say stalled. Now, many people often when it comes to these multilateral processes, like we've had, it's been a season in which we've had 3 COPs. There's been the biodiversity COP in Cali, there was the climate COP in Baku, the combat desertification COP is still ongoing in Riyadh right now, and you'll frequently hear talk in the newspapers about industry lobbyists showing up as if in some way or other we're there to hold back regulation. Now, I am in no doubt that there are some that are there to hold back regulation. But let me tell you that the vast majority of us are not there to hold back regulation, far from it. In fact, when we talk about a level playing field, we don't want a level playing field down here. We want a level playing field up here. We need high-level regulation because whilst we're the poster child for many of these issues, the fact is that there's a vast majority of business are not leaning in on this. The vast majority of regulation is not aligned with the outcomes that we need, Paris Agreement and so on. They're not aligned with ending plastic waste. So we have a hodgepodge of extended producer responsibility regulations, some of which are implemented well, many of which are not. We have a complete mishmash. You think about it, sorry, I'm off on a bit of, I get quite excited about this, as you can probably tell. But most of you will know when it comes to, we're all coming up to the Christmas season. We're all going to go around visiting friends' houses. They live in different local jurisdictions. Now, it's a little bit better here in Switzerland, but where I come from in the UK, if I travel 3 miles out of where I used to live in Cambridge to a different jurisdiction, they don't have a blue bin, they have a brown bin. And I'm standing there holding my beer bottle wondering, do I put it in the brown bin? Do I put it in the blue bin? Do I put it in the black bin? What bin do I put it in? And that jurisdiction inconsistency at a very local level in the kitchen at parties is actually replicated all the way up the jurisdiction levels to global level. This has to end. It makes it virtually impossible to have a decent investment strategy when you have such a mess of regulations. So a high-level playing field from the Plastics Treaty was what we wanted. Why haven't we got it? This year, in the democratic year of elections, there's been a lot of talk about incumbents taking the hit. Well, let me tell you that incumbency power is alive and kicking because it's what's holding this up. And we now have a situation where the Plastics Treaty, which has been negotiated extremely well, what normally takes 5 years was done in 2 years, and yet we still haven't got it over the line. It's been kicked out into next year. So successes along the way, but I'm not clear exactly how these differences between what's called the like-minded group of countries which oppose high-level regulation will be resolved in the few months that we have before we get to the next round of negotiations, INC 5.2.
Rob, thank you. Julia, I do want to get you in on this question of policy, but I also want to signal to all of you in the audience that we are going to take your questions shortly. So if you'd like to offer a thought, a question, a comment, get ready and we'll bring our paddles out into the audience and microphones to follow. So please do get ready with your questions. But Julia, where are we on regulation? What is your thinking about where we need to go?
Look, I think regulation has a very important role to play to set the framework conditions right. I think Rob mentioned it, yeah, you mentioned it. As long as it's cheaper and you can be better off financially and profitable to basically extract resources, to not pay fair wages and all of this, then it's very difficult because it's left to those companies that do it out of moral obligation. And with the next CEO, maybe this agenda changes again, as we have seen over and over again. So I think that there is one very easy measure that, I mean, every one of us, I guess, is thinking about, but government is not taking it, and this is we need to internalize social and environmental costs. At the moment, if it's cheaper to extract resources, if we're not paying the true price of these resources, then to be honest, it's very difficult to compete even in a circular business model. And yet we mentioned elections this year, with the Trump administration coming in, we're further away from any global agreement in that direction than ever. And it doesn't help if then some countries, or in this case the European Union, moves ahead, right? Because what we see is now that entire businesses in Europe are extremely tired of all the regulation. We have adopted much more in Europe a stick approach, right? So we regulate a lot. In China, actually, we don't talk a lot about China, but China is silently leading a sustainable business revolution. And we don't talk about it because they're just doing it. There's much less stick, there's much more subsidies, right? So how do I really get my players into that? China is actually leading, we don't even talk about it. We talk a lot and put spotlight on the US, where we assume that there will be a lot of backtracking. But I think we should not hold ourselves back and wait for regulation to come in. I think if we do it right, again, there is a massive business case, because using less resources will save us cost, will make our business more resilient. We can de-risk our supply chains and so on. There are massive business advantages in circularity. And I totally understand your point. Oftentimes, regulation is not just not helping us, it's even holding us back because it's over-regulated in some aspects.
Well, I do think there are important reasons to rethink the policy framework and try to get a more mixed strategy, some of which is carrots, some of which is sticks. But I do like, because I've written an article called the End Externalities Manifesto, that at the back of it all, we want people to pay for the harm they cause. And at that point, the incentive would be very strong. Aya, do you have a favorite regulation you want to push or a favorite policy you want to advance? And otherwise, I'm looking out to get a question from the audience, so please do signal and we'll bring you a paddle and a microphone. Got one right here to start with. Actually, several in the front couple of rows. Aya, please.
Yeah, I don't think I have a favorite one, but I think the ones that we like in general, they have elements which are tangible. I think, I mean, there's a lot of theory in the world that all this circularity would happen by itself, and it doesn't. So you have to have this ecosystem thinking, and you have to facilitate that, and you have to enable it. And I think there are even little things that could help in the transition, and some of them are really about the linkages to climate or social, which are critical. And I think you mentioned the waste pickers and the kind of negativism that has been towards, you know, the companies exploiting waste pickers, while it's a huge kind of a social opportunity and transition as well. So one particular point that I'd just like to point, which I would like to see in regulation, is this avoided emissions calculations, because circularity ultimately, and food is a good example, so by diverting waste out and valorizing that, you actually, it's a huge CO2 impact, and this is not at all rewarded currently in calculations. So some of that type of thinking, which is maybe more technical, would be really welcome.
So you've given us several additional points in terms of the path forward. One is that we really do need to find the business case for some of these and put a value on it. Beyond that is the idea that data matters. We need better metrics. We need to be able to track this. And I think the idea that when there's multiple gains, so it's not just a climate change or not just a resource productivity, but also a social dimension, this all gets to be much easier to move forward. But let's go to the audience now. I think we have a question right here. Do we have a microphone? Yes. Naoko.
Hi.
Please tell us who you are, and just so we get a little sense of context.
My name is Naoko Ishii at the University of Tokyo. Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. My question is, maybe the old panel, is how to create this demand. You are talking about how to monetize the kind of avoided emission, avoided waste, and because without that, there is a limitation of how much the business can do to push. So my question for the panel is, what would be the best smart way to create those demand that you mentioned, the higher level regulation, but at the same time that your value chain may be very global. So how you can also handle this kind of CBAM if you wanna roll out to the global scale, and also that the carbon is easy to think about how to put a price on carbon, but we are now talking about much more the natural system, how you can really put a price of those natural resources which could be saved. So what's your dream regulation of the policy measures?
So thank you for that question. It really reflects one of the broad themes of building bridges, which is, of course, that we need to bring a sustainability agenda with the finance world behind it to bear on climate change, but also on the move toward a nature-positive future to protecting biodiversity. So do any of you want to jump in, Rob, on that?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. So first thing to say is to make it desirable. Make it desirable. Make it easier for consumers. So I'll give you an example. There's a very interesting Chilean company called Algramo. Some of you may have heard of Algramo. We work with them on delivery of dried pet food. And it's not a question of food safety. There's no concern about that. But think about it. Carrying those heavy bags of dried pet food from the supermarket is a bit inconvenient. But if it comes to your door, and you've got a sack you can reuse, that makes it an awful lot easier. And that kind of door-to-the-door delivery reduces a huge amount of the packaging, and it's much more circular. It's getting towards circularity. Another way, so make it desirable. I think there's a real question around collaboration across the different actors in the value chain. So we can make a lot of effort on our side, and we do, and then when it gets to the point of retail, It's no use having a reuse refill part of the retail store if it's hidden at the back behind the freezer compartments, which kind of happens after a while if the demand isn't there. So you need to make it something that's easy and desirable for consumers. We've got some examples in Germany, for instance. We're working with an outfit called Circolution, which is starting to really pick up some pace now. So we're getting better at it. But it also needs for us as manufacturers to work together. It's no good Nestle doing it on its own. It needs the entire field to come together with the retailers to make it so that it's easy and desirable for consumers. That's when we'll get somewhere, I think.
Julia, I want to bring you in, and then we're going to go to a question over here on this side. So we've got the microphone, but Julia first, a further comment.
Yeah, just briefly, I think what we haven't even touched upon is this very important business model in a circular economy that is servitization, everything as a service. And I think customer centricity is key. All these models will not work if this model is very inconvenient for the consumer. You just mentioned it, right? Think about reusable coffee cups, which is an easy one. We could all just use our reusable coffee cup, but who wants to carry these sturdy cups all the way around, clean it, and engage in additional steps? So we need to really think customer-centric. So there are now these test villages in the US, for instance, where they replace in the village the bins with these reusable coffee cup bins. So wherever you take your coffee, Starbucks, Costas, wherever, you can basically put then the coffee cup in this reusable bin and they clean it and wash it for you at the central station. The idea is with these servitization models, we actually add services. We actually make it even more convenient and even more customer-centric. And these are the models that will win. The models where we say, and you do that for the environment, it neither works in your argument internally in the organization, nor does it work with the consumers. We, for the longest time, thought that there is a green consumer, and we know that the green consumer doesn't exist. The greenest consumer of all simply doesn't consume. So this is the greenest consumer of all. And all the rest, they still want to satisfy a basic need. And here we need to make it absolutely customer-centric and convenient. And I think servitization is actually a massive lever to exactly achieve that.
Thank you. All right, the question over here, lady in the second row, please.
Hi. Yeah? Okay, hi. My name is Carla Koch. I work, for the Wies Academy for Nature. And we basically strive for a relationship between nature conservation and human well-being that can reinforce each other. We've been working with partners on this topic, and we actually like to talk about the inclusive circular economy to bring out a bit also the social aspect in it and the equity aspect. And we actually partnered also with Chatham House this year, and they've just published a paper which is about how the circular economy can revive the SDGs. So coming back to that global political agenda, and also what you said, that if one country goes at it alone, no matter what the good intentions, like for the EU, for example, this can also have unintended consequences. So making the case. So my first question would be to you, what do you think about that ambition of also bringing the circular economy or inclusive circular economy as a means to an end into the whole Agenda 2030 discussion? And the second question is that through this process, we have also seen one challenge is obviously changing a working business model to make it more circular. And the other, we see at a grassroots level, a lot of entrepreneurs starting businesses from the ground that are already circular. And there's a lot also to learn from at that level. And how can we bring those actors or those experiences to the global discussion to try to unlock it or, make it move forward?
Thank you. Rob, do you want to jump in?
Very quickly, yeah, fully agree about the thesis that the circular economy can be a way forward to achieve the SDGs, one. Two, many of you may have been in the room the other day when Mary Robinson was here and she spoke about human rights very eloquently. I found it extremely powerful. It's not often talked about when it comes to circularity, but there is an initiative called the Fair Circularity Initiative that we're very much a part of. It addresses human rights for waste pickers. And waste pickers in many parts of the world are an incredibly important part, and they need dignity and their rights need to protecting right to a decent livelihood. And then finally, your final point about innovation and about startups, we actually created something called the Institute of Packaging Sciences to get across the whole range of different issues. It's housed at our R&D center in Lausanne, which actually has an incubator for such startups. So even though we're the world's biggest food and beverage company, we do see the very important need for us to stay tuned in to what's possible and happening, bubbling up from down below.
Thank you. Aya.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, we also are part of the same initiative with the waste pickers, and I think you mentioned that I used to work for UNICEF, and I think this type of grassroots kind of initiatives where the kind of the communities, the local governments or the municipalities and private sector come together, I think they are great, also helping move some of the informal sector into more formality, and initiatives in collaboration are really, really important. But one thing that I wanted to pick up on is actually the importance also to talk about, I think you spoke about regenerative agriculture, but in for instance, in the packaging area, it is the use of renewable materials and regenerative thinking and you know, we often forget that. There's a lot of focus on talking about plastics and promoting recycled plastics, for instance, but so what are the opportunity costs and alternatives as well? So I think that's one forgotten area. And finally, just very quickly, because I thought of my favorite regulation. It was kind of coming back to this, and it's maybe not my favorite, but it's a good one. I don't know how many of you know, in France there is a regulation which is called the right to repair, and there's a bigger discussion around that, and talking about the social impact, potential impact, like, you know, who is anymore, you know, fast fashion is a huge issue. So who repairs your clothes anymore? But if you have that type of regulation which actually encourages the use of small businesses to repair not only electronics and that type of equipment, but also clothes and shoes and all that. I mean, isn't that just like, you know, this is what we should really be incentivizing and encouraging?
And that really does get to customer-centric, because it goes where people want to be and sometimes can't get to because the infrastructure is not in place. We have time for one more very quick question, and so let's go to the microphone here. Please.
Oh, lovely. So hello, I'm India. I'm from the Climate Bonds Initiative. We translate climate science into tools that the financial market can use. My question is about the Jevons paradox and the role of producers and manufacturers in addressing this. So for people in the audience who don't know what this is when resource efficiency increases and therefore extraction of that resource increases as well. So we see this with aluminium, recycling and cans. So yes, what's the responsibility here?
All right. Julia, I think this comes your direction. As probably the person who's been thinking about this rebound effect, as it's sometimes called.
Very fair question, but if we think about the whole, at the core, the circular economy says, how do we basically keep things in cycles, right? So how do we decouple economic growth from resource extraction? So hopefully, even if we would be more productive, we would then have found ways to basically keep these resources much more in cycles. I think one important aspect, and we touched upon it, I just want to double down on it, is design. If you think about this, most of the time when we talk about circularity, it really comes in at an early stage at which materials do we use. But it needs to come in much earlier. How many designers in your organizations are trained on design, eco-design questions? In universities, we still don't train designers on circularity or eco-design. And this is where 80% of a product's environmental footprint are determined. So if we want to avoid Jevons paradox and all the others, we need to fundamentally rethink the design of our products. We need to actually design them for disassembly, reassembly, and so on. We talked about plastics. We need to design with monomaterials instead of gluing together all kinds of different plastics that cannot be recycled. So I think we can avoid that. The circular economy is a way to avoid the Jevons paradox, because the Jevons paradox we usually see in sustainability, meaning wherever we have efficiency gains, we then use this product more and more. In circularity, we would still use it in cycles, in an ideal world, right? And this is an idealistic perspective.
So we are running out of time, but Rob, I want to give you and then a last 30 seconds each.
Yeah, last point on that is you can resolve the paradox when virgin materials are more expensive than recycled materials. And that way we can keep plastics in the economy and out of the environment, which is kind of what happens at the moment. A final point, I think the question we want to keep coming back to at Nestlé, and we do, what would nature do? What would nature do? That's especially in the agricultural transition. That's the kind of thinking. It's our thinking that will get us out of this situation that we find ourselves, and we can make forward progress. And I actually do think that the thinking is coming through, and I am extremely optimistic that the role of business and civil society together, we can't wait for governments always, but the role of civil society and business working together, I think we can make progress on this issue.
Thank you. Aya.
Yeah, I think Rob said a lot of that, but I'd like to just, with the audience being finance, I would also like to you all to innovate on the financial solutions and financial instruments and vehicles that can also help incentivize and drive economy. So I think finance has a huge opportunity. I know there are, Lombard Odier is a great example of where integration of circularity in decisions of investment is being implemented, but it's actually not so common, and the kind of the side of it within climate at least should be an element. So encouragement into that area as well.
So this does bring us to the close. Aya, thank you for bringing us to that final point. I hope you have found something interesting in the conversation. I'm going to take away the need for innovation. Innovation in technologies, innovation in public engagement, innovation in design of the ecosystems that we're working with, innovation in finance. All of this has got to be part of a package that we bring to bear to really move us from where we are to a circular economy beyond. And I guess behind all of that is the hope that regulation over time, evolution rather than revolution, will set up the structure of those incentives. So thank you all very much for being part of our conversation, and a special thanks to our panelists. Really an outstanding conversation.